Welcome, welcome, welcome to each of to Girl Talk. Welcome to each of you today to our special edition of Girl Talk. We are here today in honor of Black History. We are having a series of stories that will be shared with us by she calls herself a writer, but I think she is just a storyteller that is just magnificent. But she is a storyteller, a writer, and she's also a textile artist. And so we're going to hear some information that will just be so emotional. It was for me, at least, that it was just um, a great addition to what we already know as parts of our Black history. So if you would welcome to our Girl Talk for me, Mrs. Sandra Scott Revelle. How are you, Miss Sandra?
Oh, I'm doing fine. Thank you so much, Charlotte, for having me. This is exciting.
You are so welcome. I am so excited about today. Not only that it is Black History Month and we are having the opportunity to celebrate that, but just the fact that we are here in your presence so that we can learn some lessons. We often hear about, all of the normal names that we hear during Black History Month, but to sit down and just really soak up some of the stories and some of the information that you have just been instrumental in scribing, and for some of us who are visual learners to really put this in a canvas of textile. So before we get started, I'd just like to talk to you and see who you are and what you have and where this all came from, and we just want to hear from you. So tell us a little bit. Well, I'll tell you what, before I get started, let me back up. Let me tell a little bit about you before we get started, and then we can elaborate. Well, Sandra was born in Sedalia, Montana, raised in Arizona, and her late in life marriage brought her to East Texas. Her professional careers as an RN, an educator, and vice principal spanned for 40 years. She's now focused on her creative journey as a self-taught emerging textile artist. Sandra lives and creates in Gun Barrel City, Texas. Sandra has a long-standing interest in biographies and Black history. In 2008, she was a journalist with the Arizona Informant, an African-American newspaper in Phoenix, Arizona. She specialized in personal interest stories and was thrilled to get interviews and then highlight their lives of those in her communities. Then a co-worker enlightened her in the Federal Writers Project, or better known as the FWP, the slave narratives written from 1936 to 1938. Sandra discovered treasures hidden in the words of photographs of those former slaves. Most of her stories, her short stories, are based on these emotional accounts or those found in other historical works. She has published both children, short stories, and devotions online, and is now working on building her collection of Black history short story devotions, which I have had the privilege and pleasure of hearing some of those. And she's going to share some of those with us today. Again, welcome, Miss Sandra. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you so much again.
So tell us, where did you get this from? Where did this all start?
Well, like you said, I have always been interested since I was a child in people's stories. It was always interesting. Even when I would watch TV as a little girl, I would sit there and I'd think, I wonder what those people are like when they're not on the TV. You know, what are their
Right.
lives like? And so I've always had this interest in people's stories. And so as I grew, my mother was always telling me stories about her family. She's a distant relative of W.E.B. Du Bois.
Oh, wow.
And so I would always hear stories about her side of the family, and then just Black history in general. These particular stories interested me because I always heard, like you had mentioned, Sojourner Truth, Frederick Douglass, you know, the normals that we hear about, Harriet Tubman and others. And then when I discovered that there was so much more, there were so many
Mm,
more people, and then just hearing their stories, I thought, I want to know more. I want to
right.
know how their lives were affected. And we know
Right.
about the tragedies and the cruelties of slavery, but how did they handle it? And in particular, how did they experience God in the midst of their suffering?
Mm, right.
And so to me, it was like finding a treasure chest with all these pearls and jewels and just digging in and bringing them to the surface. And so that's kind of where I'm at. And that's what I want to do, is kind of compile these stories, because
Wow.
they're people just like us, with heartache and hardship. And then I
Right.
think that we can learn from their stories.
So how long have you worked with the textile part of it?
It's been probably about maybe 3 to 4 years. It hasn't really been that long.
Wow.
After I started with the writing, and I was going to write my adopted mother's story, and then I started going. It's like I felt in my heart I was supposed to write Black history devotions, which I didn't even know what that was. And so I started researching, and as I researched and as I read these stories, it's like pictures kept popping up in my head. And I thought, I want to be able to somehow join the pictures of what I'm seeing to what I'm writing. And so that's kind of how that got started. I'm not a very good seamstress, but I used to, when I was teaching, I would use paper a lot, construction paper, to do Black history for the classroom. And so I just adapted what I did with the construction paper into fabric, and I pretty much use just remnants. And that's why my website is remnantsarise.com, because I use pieces of fabric that maybe have been cast off. And that's also kind of like a spiritual picture of kind of how sometimes people's lives are cast off, or we just only get a
Right.
little bit of the whole thing. And so I started using remnants and just whatever I could find. And it was amazing. The textures and colors and patterns would just kind of come together for me. So
Wow.
it's been a lot of fun.
Well, I'll tell you what, guys, I want to show you some of her beautiful work that she has created. And I believe that the very first story that you're going to do is entitled The Charity Still.
Yes, this is about Charity Still, and actually, it's entitled, the text style is Charity Still, but the story is actually William Still, and it's an adaptation from the story of Peter, who is the brother of William Still. And William wrote the Underground Railroad and published this book in 1872, and it highlights stories of slaves as they passed through his home in Philadelphia on the way to freedom. But this particular story amazed me because it was just phenomenal, the answer to prayer and God's bringing this family together again. So yeah, and I
Wow.
and I just see, when I was reading her story, I could just see her as a mother, just devastated by the loss of her two boys, and all she could do was pray. And so that's why it's very simple, just a picture of her looking out into the sky and praying over her boys.
And I have had the opportunity to see these particular art pieces up close and personal in person, and what amazed me is the amount of detail that you have poured into each one of these. It is, I mean, it is just moving when you see it and you hear the story. I mean, the art really jumps off the page and just it's so surreal as you're looking at it, and you can really feel the pain that she felt um, going through that particular dilemma. And I was, the very first time I saw your artwork, I was just so blown away. I have never seen, and I've gone to art museums and things like that, but for some reason, it just appears that there's just so much detail. And it could just be, again, when God does things, he does things well. And so, because he has really orchestrated you to do this, maybe that's what it is. It's just that the love and everything that you have poured into these pictures, into this artwork, is just it leaps off of the page. So as you have worked with it, and not very long, what are some of the challenges that you have experienced going through and really learning, being a self-taught textile artist?
Well, it's been interesting because I don't really know that much about fabric. So a lot of it is trial and error, but I've always loved color and texture. And so when I'm reading the story, it's like it just kind of comes to mind a simple picture. And then it's a matter of just drawing, from that and going through all the fabrics I have, which I have quite a bit, and picking which piece goes where. And like for Charity's dress, that was something that was given to me. And as soon as I saw that, I thought I could see this woman, wearing this plaid. It's not anything real super decorative, but it's like I could see her head, her headwear and the shawl as she stood. It was a little chilly. I mean, and I made the texture there with the fabric for her shawl. I did that by hand. So I don't know. It just kind of comes together. So those are challenges. It's just learning about the fabrics, what you can and can't do.
Wow.
And then just the organization, because sometimes it's I have all this inspiration, but it's just the organization of setting down and doing it and finishing it through, because I have so many things in my mind right now, things I want to do that I'm so excited about, but it's just sitting down and seeing it through. But it's really been a lot of it's been inspiring. I've really experienced the Lord so much, and just having them come together the way that they are. And each one is very, very different, just like the people are different. And there's sometimes I'll start out with one sketch, and then in the middle I'll change. And you'll see that with some of my others, over the next few Sundays. Some of them they started out one way and they're completely different as I started to work. And it's just a matter of trusting the Lord as he kind of guides me.
Right, right. So would you like to go ahead and start on this first piece, and we'll talk a little bit more.
Okay, I'm going to get a little bit of water here. Okay, so this is William Still. And like I said, this is my creative adaptation of the story that was presented in William's book, The Underground Railroad, which was published in 1872. So, William Still, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. A slave couple committed to spend the rest of their lives together in freedom. The price was high. He purchased his freedom by doing extra labor and forsaking sleep for months. The woman seized her freedom by escape. The price she paid was leaving behind 2 young sons to God's care. So inside the caverns of her soul, she carried them north. She cast out prayers toward the jeweled night sky for her boys, well into their unseen manhood. Years passed. She had several children born in freedom. William was the youngest. He learned about these lost brothers through his mama's prayers and tears. William Still became a warrior against slavery, a weapon for the Underground Railroad. Slaves fresh from human pursuit were secreted through his doorway in Pennsylvania. William put ink to paper by documenting their names, plantations, family, and birth dates, if known. He included the miracles that ushered them into freedom, or their failed but persistent attempts to get there. These stories splayed open the brutality stalking behind plantation walls and the pious hypocrisy sitting in Southern churches. The true face of slavery slithered to the surface and hissed at the world through these narratives. On this particular night, William tapped the excess ink from the pen, covered the inkwell, and stood to extinguish the lantern. Mid-breath, the secret tap, tap, tap at the window alerted him another package was delivered. William cracked the door, then inspected the man as he edged past him. He was of medium build, ebony skin. His woolly hair was sprinkled with silver. Creases mapped his forehead. William was not sure if it was from current worry or a lifetime of struggle, probably both. The stranger scoped the room with sidewise glances. Certain of his hunger, William offered a meal. The man devoured the bread and dried meat within seconds and guzzled the water without a breath. Still winced when his eyes rested on the stranger's hands holding the cup. Fingers twisted and scarred, joints swollen from overuse and injury. William looked away and returned to his desk and sat down to write. I generally write whatever information you can remember and want to share about your journey here. Is that permissible? Yes, sir, but I was told to contact you since you may have information to help me find my relatives. I may be able to help. Let's start with you first. Your name, please. Peter, sir, he replied. William felt Peter's eyes staring at his pen dancing across the paper. Excuse me, sir, for looking. I ain't never seen no Negro writing like that before and living in such a fine house, Peter commented. There will be many things available to you now, Peter. Where are you from? Alabama. Like a fountain, Peter gushed out the names of several masters, plantations, the work required of him, the cruelty, the details of buying himself and his freedom for $500, and then traveling 1,600 miles to Philadelphia. I left behind my wife and 3 children. Don't know if I'll ever see them again. But sir, if you would please help me, please, sir, find my parents, if they still be living. It's been so many years and well, I prayed and prayed to the Lord for me to be with them again, if only just to see them. What are your parents' names? Levin and Sydney, sir. I've been hoping and praying, but it's been so many years. The pen froze mid-sentence. William's eyes locked on Peter, who squirmed under the scrutiny. What did you say? I said, I pray. No, the names. Peter repeated their parents' names. William realized the eyes he stared into were like his father's. The creases on the forehead and cleft chin were replicas of his mother's. What were the chances of all the doorways for Peter to enter? He gained access to this one and spilled the story of his life to William, the younger brother he never knew existed. Over 40 years of persistent, against all odds prayer, both by mother and son, led to a miracle reunion only God could orchestrate. God answers prayers in ways that leave us stunned with his precision and timeliness. Prayer itself is a miracle, a doorway God's children walk through to converse with their Heavenly Father. We pour out our pain, hopes, and desires. Sometimes our pleas seem to disappear into the atmosphere, out of reach. God does hear and takes hold of them. His answer is a sovereign act of a loving God towards his children. So sometimes it's yes, and sometimes it's no. His children should learn to develop confidence to cast their cares on him and trust his answer and timing is for their best. Ephesians 3:20. God can do exceedingly abundantly above and beyond all that we ask or think, according to the power that works within us.
Wow. I think when I have heard several of your stories, I think this one is probably one of my favorites. So I'm glad you chose to do this one. It is just breathtaking. Just again, you can almost feel the hesitancy when he's writing and he stops because he's now realized that this is his brother, that he was separated from his family. Absolutely beautiful, beautiful. And of course, the devotion that goes with it is just timeless. It can be utilized over various different situations, life situations that we all are going through. And if we're not going through something right now, we either just came out of something or we're getting ready to go through something. It's just like it's just the life we live. It's the way that we live. But we know that we serve a God who can handle whatever we are in and going through. Yeah. All right. You have another story for us as well.
Yes. This one is a story of Betsy Stockton, and I think this was actually my first story that I wrote, and the first textile that I actually did.
Wow.
I found out about Betsy from a friend. Let me get a drink of water here. When I was visiting a friend who lives in Maui, and she and I are both writers, and we were discussing just kind of the things. I told her I wanted to write Black history devotions and kind of what was going on there. She goes, well, have you heard of Betsy Stockton? And I said, no, I haven't. She goes, oh, well, she lived right here in Maui. I'm like, really? I didn't even know. So anyway, that's kind of how I discovered her. And my stories, what I have done is I've gathered just little bits of information from basically two articles. One was from, both of them are online, and one of them has excerpts of her journal. So I find her story just amazing because we can see from the beginning, from the time she was a slave as a child, and then the progression of how God used her into her later years. So I find her story just very inspiring. She was a single woman. There's a lot of single women out here, but how God used her, and from place to place to place, no matter where she went, even when she didn't want to go, she was obedient and God used her. So she's got a great story.
Talk to me about some of this artwork that is on this particular textile.
Okay. Well, it's several pieces, and they're all of this is upholstery fabric, believe it or not. And the people's faces are actually, the whole fabric piece was these different colors of circles. And when I first looked at that, I was looking through stuff trying to determine how I was going to do her story. And when I saw that, I thought, oh my gosh, those are faces. And so there are different colors. And so I knew that she visited 3 people groups. The Hawaiians were the first. And so I cut them out and did the handwork on them so to show the Hawaiian ethnics, like their hair, the leis, the flowers. And then I attached each one to like a quilt. I don't know if it's kind of hard to see because there's a lot of patterns, but each people group has a quilt that they're on. And this particular quilt for the Hawaiians was very botanical. And then, so I've got 4 there. And then when she goes to the Native Americans, they have a little blanket that they're on, and I did their hair and the feather and the headbands. And so those are all done by hand. And then when it goes to the African Americans, where she started the schools back in Princeton, there you have the African American kids and their hair, and then the blanket. The background is another piece of fabric that I did the letters. The letters are already there, but I used that because of her emphasis with education. And so, and this is the only picture that we have of Betsy Stockton. And this is like a couple of years before she passed away. There's no other pictures of her. And then there's a scripture. I'm looking, I have the piece right over here. There's a scripture that I used. I think it was Psalm 25, because it talked about children in that psalm. And so I used that because that's where her heart was, to educate children. And that's how God used her.
Yeah.
And then the hand stitching and stuff was just for
absolutely just beautiful. Now, our listeners and those who are watching have the opportunity to ask questions.
Okay.
And so I'm sure you can imagine. I have some who are already asking, are your pieces for sale?
These particular ones, I'm kind of hanging on to the Black history ones right now, because I'm really not sure what direction I'm going to be going with them, because I'm trying to compile several. And it's so important for me to have the actual pieces, because I know we're doing this right now and you can see them, but to see them in person, it's a whole nother game.
Yes, it is. It really is.
So I have some speaking engagements where, right now one is still live, one is going to be Zoom, but I'd like to be able to take them with me so people can actually see them, especially those that work with fabrics.
Right.
So, but I do have some others that are for sale they're on my website.
And so that means, guys, you have to come back for the next 4 Sundays, for the next 3 Sundays, so that you can see all of the ones that she has. Okay, well, let's hear about Miss Betsy Stockton.
Betsy Stockton. Okay. Betsy Stockton, Sandwich Islands, 1824. Betsy paced back and forth along the ship's deck. She grabbed her skirt in time to quiet it from the warm, billowing winds. If only her heart could be so easily quieted. Lord, am I just a seed thrower, a planter? Am I never to see the harvest? Bronze-skinned islanders gathered along the beach, dressed like rows of hibiscus and ginger in full bloom. A farewell bouquet, she thought. Aloha, Auntie Betsy. Aloha, they cried, waving. She raised a hand in return. Warm tears streamed down her face. Lord, I leave this work unfinished, and I don't understand why, but your will be done. Several canoes paddled, kept pace with the ship out into the Pacific. They skimmed the ocean like they rode on angels' wings. The paddles performed a dance of synchronized motion as they sliced through the water. Betsy waved both her hands. The rowers paused mid-rhythm and waved their paddles in a final aloha. Sealed in her memory are these final scenes of paradise. Black sand shores, canoes bobbing, emerald mountains shrinking into the horizon, and the faces of children and parents touched by her schooling and faith. 17 years earlier, Princeton, New Jersey, 1807. Betsy was born into slavery. As a young girl, she was given as a servant to Elizabeth Stockton, who later married Ashbel Green, a Presbyterian minister and president of Princeton College. When Elizabeth died a few years later, Betsy stayed on in the household. Mr. Green allowed Betsy homeschool and Sabbath lessons with free access to his library. Her keen, inquisitive mind flourished, but so did her sassiness. Reverend Green voiced great concern for Betsy's soul. He kept pressing the need for her to be dedicated to God in baptism. But young Betsy showed little penitence. She dug in her heels and won most of their tug-of-war battles. Green finally sent Betsy to stay with his nephew's family for 3 years, hoping the change in environment would provide the needed discipline. In 1816, spiritual revival flooded Princeton, and unruly Betsy was swept up in the current. The 18-year-old was convinced and convicted of her sin. Unable to ignore Holy Spirit's tapping at the door of her heart, she answered and was released from her shackles of spiritual darkness. Not long afterward, Mr. Green officially granted her personal freedom as well. With a heart turned towards others, she was willing to be a catalyst for change. The lack of education and teachers for colored children needed to be remedied, and Betsy excelled in literature, nursing, and the Bible. Maybe she could be an instrument to pour into others. The mission. When Betsy learned of missionaries traveling across the ocean, she made it her goal to travel to the dark continent of Africa. Reverend Green and others immediately discouraged her plan. It took several rounds of mental sparring for Betsy to finally let it go. So when an opportunity to go to the Sandwich Islands was presented to her, she recognized it as a pathway to fulfilling her calling as a nurse, missionary, and teacher. Reverend Green wrote a letter of recommendation for her service, and Betsy insisted the contract list her as a missionary in her own right, not as a domestic servant. This set in motion for 24-year-old Betsy to be the first single non-white female overseas missionary to Hawaii. The missionary trip departed from Connecticut on November 20th, 1822. Betsy recorded the highs and lows of the 5-month non-stop journey. The want for privacy, the persistent tossing and turning of the ship, the drastic changes and exposure to weather led to the layers of her own sinfulness to be peeled back. A quote from her journal reads, "I always knew the human heart was a sink of sin and that mine was full of it. I did not know until now that the sink had no bottom to it." The voyage was a pruning time for Betsy, but a time when she grew stronger. The common children. The anchor dropped in Honolulu. The passengers were eager to trade the ship for solid land. But when the island welcoming committee of partially naked men arrived, the missionary women escaped below deck, and even the men were shocked. Betsy was startled too, but her astute thinking saved the situation. She had helped deliver the 2-week-old son of the Stewarts, a fellow missionary couple. Understanding the islanders' love for children, she grabbed the baby and presented the small pink bundle for the natives to see. The child was passed around, admired, and kissed, and tensions dissipated. The Stewarts and Betsy soon transferred to the town of Lahaina on Maui. Betsy's deeper purpose soon unfolded. Once requested to teach English to the young prince, Betsy boldly asked to include the educational needs of the common children. As soon as she received a favorable nod, she prepared Bible lessons, math, history, English, and Latin with a fury. She organized and took charge of the first school for lower-class islanders, which sent waves of excitement throughout the island. Betsy's life extended outside of school activities, knowing that she couldn't give from an empty container. She deepened her spiritual walk with persistent study and prayer. She also continued daily assisting the Stewarts, and this left little extra time in her long, tiring days. Betsy helped with the delivery of Mrs. Stewart's second child, and after a difficult birth, her health declined. Returning home was the only answer. Betsy had developed a solid commitment to the Stewarts, but the thoughts of leaving the infant school devastated her. No matter how she fasted or prayed or willed it to be so, the door was closing. Leaving the school in disarray was not an option, so Betsy's last moments were used to train natives to maintain the school until other missionaries arrived. Her own personal vision of the school would not be fulfilled. She surrendered, leaving the outcome in God's hands. The harvest. The seedlings Betsy planted during her 2-year stay on Maui peeked through the surface and produced a harvest that still feeds many. Over 150 years later, at the site near Betsy's school stands the thriving Lahaina High School. She handled with excellence the small things entrusted to her, so God advanced her to a different audience and a wider stream. The skills she developed on Maui primed her to teach Native Americans in Canada and African American children in Philadelphia, and to establish Witherspoon Street Presbyterian Church for Blacks. She became a sought-after and prized educator in Philadelphia for 30 years. Betsy lived full circle, born a slave in Princeton, but she died in Princeton, one of its most admired and beloved figures. Whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. Luke 16:10.
Wow, what great history from Betsy Stockton.
Yep.
And again, as parents, it's our job to educate our children on our history. It's not the school system's job. We see now that some of our history doesn't even make it to the classroom.
Right.
So it's really our responsibility. What I love about what you're doing is, again, I can't iterate it enough. It's names and people and journeys that we've never heard of before. I never heard of Betsy Stockton.
Right.
And so we're just, this is an opportunity, again, our Black History Month series, but I want to commit to doing something throughout the year that will educate us on history, on our history, and far beyond the George Washington Carver and Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, and great people did wonderful things for the world. But there are so many other individuals who had these same struggles that some of them that we're still having today, that we can talk about and that we can educate and really share and hopefully bring a different perspective to Black history and to what we have, here. So tell us a little bit about some of your successes that you've had with this textile art.
Oh my goodness, it has been so fast and furious. It's kind of blown me away, Charlotte, really. The first thing was, gosh, I can't even remember if it was 2020. It was 2020. No, it was 2019. I had, let me put it this way. One of the things that has been such a blessing for me is since I have come out and tried to really work with my art instead of just going, oh, I'm not an artist, I'm not an artist, not an artist, until I finally, it's like God said, yes, you are an artist, so let's just get out there. And so since I have been praying on that and getting out there, it's like there are so many people that have surrounded me in community. I mean, people from all walks of life that just seem to surround and bolster me up and encourage me. And so it's like I've been meeting people that know people that know people that open doors. And it's like I don't even have to really do a whole lot. It's
Right.
like even just like meeting you.
Wow. Has been such a blessing.
Yes. And so one of the bigger things that happened was being invited to send artwork for the exhibit at the George Bush Library. And that was February of last year. And I had 7 of my pieces there. And it was for, I can't remember the name of it, artist, the Black, I can't think of the name of it. But it was all Black artists. And I mean, there was a wide variety of art, creativity that was displayed, but I was very honored to be able to have my works there. And and then I've had some stuff at I've had one piece, it's not Black history, but it does depict a Black family at the Tyler Museum of Art. And that was just earlier, that was in 2020, yeah, towards the end of the year there. Actually, it was spring. It was the spring of that year, even though we're having COVID and all that stuff. So I had that there. What else? And I think right now, what I'm focusing on is trying to get more of just compile more of my stories. But those have been the successes that I've experienced recently as far as the art is concerned.
So I actually looked up the exhibit that was at the George Bush Library. It was called "The Art, Past and Present from a Black Artist's Perspective."
Yes.
Yeah. Wow. That's quite an honor.
Yeah, it was. I was shocked. I was shocked when they said, "Oh yes, we want your pieces." And the person who had told me about it said, "Well, just submit 5." And I thought, well, I've got 7, so I'm just going to see what happens. And they said, "Oh yeah, just all 7." I'm like, okay. So it was very much a blessing. It was very much a blessing.
Well, I'm certainly excited for you and what God has in store for you with your textile art. We don't see a lot of African Americans doing textile art. And so to have one among us right here in Gun Barrel City, who is not far from us, and we are working, for those of you who are in the Ellis County area, we are working to have her art on display at the Ennis Public Library. So for the month of February. So if you missed some of her series, we'll be actually highlighting Miss Sandra on the next 3 Sundays with our Black History series using textile art. So she'll be here, but if you want to have an opportunity to see her things up close and personal, you can visit those things at the library. So they're not there yet, but they should be. We're working on getting those pieces there. So individuals are asking again about the sale of these beautiful pieces. So unfortunately, they are not for sale right now. So we're going to give her a little bit of time to build up her repertoire of art. And hopefully in the very near future, you can follow her right now. You can follow her on her website, on her pages. And Miss Sandra, I will allow you to give those out so that we can all make sure we stay in contact with you. Where can we find your pieces?
Right now, they're on my website. My website is remnantsarise.com. So it's REMNANTS, Remnants Arise, ARISE.com. And you can email me at Sandra@remnantsarise.com. So yeah, and I have other pieces there that are not Black history pieces, but they are Afrocentric. Most of them are Afrocentric. So, and then you can email me and we can discuss pricing. But yeah, the Black history ones in particular, are not for sale right now.
Gotcha. And so we'll have some others on display on next Sunday at 4 o'clock, as well as the 21st and the 28th. So I know you touched on this a little bit when we first opened, but I have someone who is asking in regards to the process, what inspires you first, a vision of what you like to create, the fabrics or the texture within the layers, or a combination?
When I'm actually making the art, since I have to say it's probably the colors and the patterns. I usually get inspired to, when I'm reading the story, I get kind of like a picture of what is happening in a particular scene. And then I take it from there. And I try to make it as simple as possible because I don't want anything that's going to be super busy, but I want the emotion to come through and for you to kind of like be there. So I look at the colors and and then how the textures can help bring out whatever is going on in the scene. So it's kind of like a combination, I think. And then I'm also thinking, okay, what can I do to get this done? Because I know that sounds horrible, but it is so labor intensive, each one. And so I was starting out doing mostly them all by hand. I mean, like Betsy's was, I don't think there's any machine sewing on that. It's all hand. And so I thought, this is going to take forever. I'm never going to, and I'm not very patient. That's one thing God's working with me with. I'm not very patient. I'm like, God, this is going to take forever to get these done. And so I did start doing more machine sewing on some of them. So
Right.
I tried to make it as simple as possible. And I don't know, it's a combination of both. So it's hand and machine stitching, whichever fits the particular piece I'm working on.
Never can get the job done the quickest.
Yeah, right. I have so many, it's like I want to get on to the next thing because I keep getting inspired to do more. I have so many things I want to do that I'm really excited about. So
what's next? What's next for you?
You know what? I have loved the stories of, well, it's from a book. I think, I can't remember, it was 1930s or 1940s. James Weldon Johnson, The Seven Trombones, and it's a collection of sermons. I would love to get those in a textile art compilation. I would just love to do that. And so I've been reading those and rereading those and just kind of figuring how I can do those pieces. So there's that. And then I also would like to do a little bit more abstract with my textile. I love playing with the patterns and the colors there. So nothing with necessarily any people in it, but just playing with the textile patterns. So I'm looking forward to doing something like that as well as in continuing to build my Black History devotion.
Right. Well, I am just excited about what God is doing for you and through you. I look forward to getting my hands on a copy of that devotional book as soon as it hits the shelves. I'm sure it will be a blessing to so many people. So I'd like to ask, again, we don't see a lot of individuals who have gotten into the textile art. So what would you say to someone who has an interest in textile art, but just really not confident with it because there's, not a lot of resources out there?
I would just say to kind of go with it and experiment as you go. And then one thing that I have done is I have become members of some quilt guilds. And it's kind of funny because there are several African-American quilt guilds. I know there's one in Dallas that's primarily African-American, but I'm not a quilter. So it's kind of interesting going into those groups. And so they're talking about quilting, but I'm not a quilter. But I did find a group that's Ellis County that they have what they call an art quilt group. And so theirs is more along the lines of what I do, even though mine is still different, it's kind of along the same lines. And so joining with a community of others that can help you with your skills, help you learn about the fabrics, that is that would be very, very helpful for you. And then just listen to the Lord. That's where the inspiration and creativity comes from. And it'll be each one of ours, everything we create will be different. So there's no need to compare or any of that kind of stuff, because it'll be different.
Right, right. Well, again, can you give our listeners and our viewers your contact information one more time?
Okay. It's remnantsarise.com is my website. And my email address is sandra@remnantsarise.com.
And for those of you who may not have the opportunity to, or have had the opportunity directly to her information, and so if you did not get a chance to see all of her the presentation, the stories read that went with those particular pieces, please log in at 4 o'clock, and she will have some other pieces on display as she also shares the devotional stories, the short story and the devotional that goes along with those pieces. So here on Girl Talk, we are is to provide information. A compilation of stories to that list of things that helped us in our just gaining more knowledge. And so I just want to again we will be ready to just sit, listen, and glean from you. There we go. I think
it froze a little bit there.
Kind of froze.
Yeah.
But I am so glad that we are back on.
Yep.
We're on. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Till next week.
Week.